It was December 23, 1985, just 2 days before Christmas, in the San Francisco suburb of Concord, California. The weather that day was typical for early winter, with a thick layer of fog settling over the valley in the early evening. But inside the Sunvalley Mall, the atmosphere was lively and festive. Opened in 1967, Sunvalley was one of the largest malls in America at the time, and that night, it was packed with last-minute shoppers and excited children waiting to see Santa Claus. In the lobby, dozens of families were enjoying a Christmas show featuring the characters of Sesame Street. For shoppers like 22-year-old Pamela Stanford, there to pick up her wedding ring, and Anne Luong, waiting in line to see Santa with her 14-month-old son, Alexander, it must have seemed like an idyllic holiday scene. None of them could have imagined the hell that was about to be unleashed upon Sunvalley that night. Without warning, a small twin-engine light aircraft slammed into the 3-story mall above Macy's department store, shattering the skylight and tearing a 50-foot hole in the roof. The pilot and 2 passengers aboard the aircraft were killed instantly, while inside the mall, hundreds of unsuspecting shoppers were cast into a literal hell as burning aviation fluid rained down like napalm. The perfect holiday atmosphere that permeated the mall only moments earlier quickly disintegrated into a nightmare as the deadly firestorm of shattered glass and burning fuel injured 81 people, some fatally. So what caused this tragic crash that would ultimately claim 7 lives? And could the Sunvalley Mall disaster have been avoided? Earlier that day, Jim Graham, a 67-year-old pilot and founder of General Air Services, had flown his secretary to San Luis Obispo aboard his Beechcraft 95 AA Baron. 2 of Graham's friends, 23-year-old flying enthusiast Brian Oliver and 48-year-old Jack Lewis, a financial consultant, tagged along for the 500-mile round-trip flight. Tragically, it would be the last they ever took. After dropping off his secretary, Graham flew back to Concord with Oliver and Lewis, arriving over the city at around 8:30 p.m. By then, a thick blanket of fog covered most of Contra Costa County, including their final destination, Buchanan Airfield. With a ceiling of only 400 feet and visibility less than 3 miles, Graham had to rely on the plane's instrumentation to land. Even for a pilot with 50 years of experience, including as a Navy aviator during World War II, landing in heavy fog presents a serious challenge. But there may have been other factors at play as well. At 8:33 p.m., Graham received a clearance approach from both the Oakland Air Route Traffic Control Center and Travis Air Force Base Approach Control. Located less than 2 miles from the Sunvalley Mall, Buchanan Field wasn't equipped with a radar system then. This meant the controller could only give Graham clearance for a straight-in landing at runway 19R, one of 2 at the airfield at the time. For a straight-in landing, the control tower uses radar to align an aircraft with a designated runway. The pilot descends to an altitude of 320 feet above the ground, maintaining a straight path until they can see the runway markers and land safely. If the aircraft passes a specific marker along the runway before touching down, designated a missed approach point, the landing is aborted and the pilot must ascend to 2,500 feet above mean sea level and circle for another attempt. On the evening of December 23rd, this is exactly what happened with Jim Graham's aircraft. After overshooting the runway on his first attempt, Graham radioed in a missed landing and then executed an ascending left turn to reach altitude for another approach. The Buchanan controller instructed Graham to contact the tower at Travis Air Force Base, but only received a garbled reply from the Beechcraft. Graham's plane then rose briefly into the clouds, but quickly reappeared, inexplicably making a steep, descending right turn into the roof of Macy's department store. Witnesses on the ground would later report hearing the aircraft's engine sputter as the plane's landing lights became visible through the dense fog. Something wasn't right with Graham's Beechcraft Baron, but whether it was mechanical failure or pilot error that caused the engines to falter would take time to uncover. Authorities initially suspected Graham of attempting an illegal landing at Buchanan Field's second runway, 1L. Accusations that the Buchanan control tower had instructed pilots to execute this illegal maneuver before had been levied on several occasions, so it was logical for investigators to follow this thread. However, recordings show that the controller at Buchanan Field instructed Graham to contact the tower at Travis Air Force Base, which would have been standard procedure for the missed approach. More importantly, had Graham been attempting an illegal landing on runway 1L, he would not have retracted his landing gear, as the investigation later showed to have been the case.
Investigators spent all day going over the records, but they're still not much closer to understanding why the plane crashed. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board and from the Federal Aviation Administration are working on it.
40 years later, there is still no definitive answer as to why Graham executed that fateful maneuver, resulting in the Sunvalley disaster. But whatever the cause, accidental or deliberate, that sharp descending turn proved catastrophic for the crowd of holiday shoppers inside the Sunvalley Mall. When the Beechcraft slammed through Macy's roof, it triggered an alarm at nearby fire stations, but it also severed the main pipes of the sprinkler network, disabling the entire system. Water poured from the broken pipes into the building, but did nothing to extinguish the fire spreading through the atrium. Then the power went out, plunging the already chaotic scene into darkness and adding to the panic and confusion.
The plane came through the ceiling and blew up into my face, and I fell back onto the ground, and my boyfriend dragged me in through Macy's until I stood up. All I saw was when I saw the plane come down and it blew up in my face, and that's all I saw.
People in other parts of the mall felt the ground shake and assumed it was just another earthquake, which people in that part of the country are accustomed to. Then they saw hundreds of panicked, screaming shoppers stampeding away from the atrium. Former firefighter Wayne Grell was in the mall that night and witnessed the devastation.
There was nothing left of the area where Santa was. The tree and all just totally burnt up, just went up in a ball of flame, and there were little kids running out of there. And I feel bad because my wife was due here she's due December 25th, Christmas Day, and it'll be our first one. And here these poor little kids were getting burnt from this whole thing.
While many shoppers attempted to flee the carnage, others went into rescue mode, acting as first responders until the professionals arrived. Employees at Sears department store used the ice from their freezers to treat some of the less severely burned victims, while clothing was stripped from mannequins to be used as bandages. Brand new coats and jackets were turned into makeshift stretchers. The cool water brought some degree of relief from the burns, but many of those in the atrium would need medical attention if they were to have any chance of surviving. Fortunately, the initial wave of first responders began arriving at Sunvalley within minutes of the crash, but conflicting reports from shoppers hampered rescue efforts. Some witnesses reported an earthquake to the arriving firefighters and EMTs, while others claimed it was a terrorist attack. Despite the confusion, ambulances from across the county were transporting the injured to 10 different hospitals within 30 minutes of the crash.
Outside Mount Diablo Hospital in Concord, the ambulances came and went, carrying people whose last-minute Christmas shopping turned to tragedy.
It happened to have been an exceptionally quiet night, so there couldn't have been a better time to have a disaster than we had last night.
Unfortunately, for 4 of the victims, the heroic actions of the first responders wouldn't be enough to save their lives. Anne Luong and her son, Alexander, who were in line to see Santa when the plane hit, were buried by debris from the roof. Anne would survive, but Alexander died 3 days later on December 28th. Pam Stanford, who was there to pick up the rings for her wedding in February, was burned on over 80% of her body. She succumbed to her injuries a day later on Christmas Eve. The new year saw 2 more victims claimed by the crash. Chandrika Shaw of San Mateo County died on January 7th, and Patricia Larson of Contra Costa County survived until February 1986. All told, 7 people lost their lives as a result of the Sunvalley Mall plane crash. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, with some of the burn victims requiring multiple surgeries endured over months and years. For countless shoppers in the mall that night, the psychological trauma would leave scars that lingered for decades. But should the conditions that led to this tragedy have been allowed to exist in the first place? For years, the residents of Concord, California, had argued with city officials that it was unsafe to operate an airport so close to businesses and homes, but their complaints fell on deaf ears. Built by the U.S. Army in 1942 at the height of World War II, Concord Army Airfield was given to Contra Costa County by the military in 1946 and renamed Buchanan Field Airport. By 1977, Buchanan was the 16th busiest airport in the country, ahead of even San Francisco International, JFK, and LaGuardia. The city of Concord grew around the airfield. So did safety concerns over Buchanan's proximity to the many commercial and residential structures. So when Sunvalley Mall opened its doors in 1967, less than 2 miles from the airport, many residents said it was a disaster waiting to happen, and they were right. On July 15, 1984, all 6 passengers aboard a Piper Cheyenne aircraft were killed following a near collision with another plane while attempting to land at Buchanan Field. The pilot's quick reactions avoided a mid-air collision, but the maneuver stalled the engines, causing the Cheyenne to crash into a utility shed of a local car dealership. Located less than a mile down Concord Avenue from Buchanan Field, Shepherd Potomac had 20 employees working in their showroom when the Cheyenne crashed into the shed filled with flammable materials. Had the plane stayed aloft for another 50 feet, it would have destroyed the showroom and likely killed everyone inside. While the loss of 6 lives is undeniably tragic, the city of Concord was lucky in that the crash didn't turn into a bigger disaster. Tragically, that luck would run out 19 months later when Jim Graham's Baron slammed into Sunvalley Mall. The National Transportation and Safety Board, NTSB, arrived at the scene to inspect the wreckage and collect evidence. The investigation was temporarily delayed while Jim Graham's widow sued to have her own technical expert present during the breakdown of the engines by their manufacturer, Teledyne Industries. However, a district court eventually ruled against Graham's wife, allowing the investigation to continue. Ultimately, the NTSB concluded that pilot error and disorientation caused by adverse weather conditions were the likely cause of the crash. For the residents of Concord, the Sunvalley Mall crash reinforced their claims that the airport was an imminent threat to public safety. But the city and the FAA refused to shut Buchanan Field down. In fact, the airport continued private plane operations after the crash and began commuter jet service on May 1, 1986, when Pacific Southwest Airlines, PSA, began flights between Concord and Los Angeles International, LAX. Four days after the crash, the first lawsuits were filed by the victims and their families, alleging negligence on the part of city planners who should never have allowed the mall to be built so close to an airport. The litigation dragged on for years, but the injured claimants and businesses were eventually awarded the equivalent of approximately $33 million in today's money. At the Sunvalley Mall, the stores that were unaffected by the crash reopened almost immediately, while the damaged areas of the property underwent extensive and costly renovations. Unfortunately, neither the crash nor the lawsuits have brought Buchanan Field any closer to being shut down, despite a number of incidents that have occurred since the disaster, including the incident in 1984 and the Sun Valley crash in 1985. 6 aircraft have crashed in densely populated Concord, California, while taking off or attempting to land at Buchanan Field. All of the accidents occurred within miles of the airport, including the latest crash in January 2024, which also happened on Concord Avenue, where the mall is still in operation. Unfortunately, it may only be a matter of time before another wayward aircraft hits the mall, possibly causing an even more significant loss of property and life.
I think of when the Hindenburg went down. Oh, the humanity.